Good morning, everyone. Jacques from Dapper Shaves. I've had a question around scale making, the processes, and so forth. At this point in time, I haven't got an active project, plus it's quite time consuming. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you an overview of my approach of making scales. I think it's actually a quite easy process. So if you are used to working with your hands and you've got some basic tools, I think it's a very, very easy process. So turning this into something like this. Okay. This is Rhodesian teak. This is my dapper dollar. It's actually a gold dollar 208, which I changed and made some scales. So I'm going to take you through from this to this. The most important thing for me is to try and see what you can salvage. If you get a blade only, there's not a lot of things to salvage, but sometimes the razor's got broken scales. As an example, this is a piece of horn scales from an old Wayne butcher. I've got another bigger piece here somewhere, and I use these things typically for sometimes inlays or making a wedge, as in the case with this razor. I make wedges. Okay, so important, reuse what you can. So, where do you start? For me, design is essential and key, and so forth, that's the thing I spend the most time on. You can go and download scale templates from the internet. They are regularly available. They're even specific to specific brands and in sizes. For me, I like to do things custom off the bat, and then I don't need to worry about some of the scales maybe looking bulky or is too small. So, you take a piece of paper. You put the blade down, you take a pencil, and you carefully and as close as possible draw out the shape of the blade. So when you've got the shape of the blade drawn out, here's another example, then I use all kinds of old scales I've got. Or if you are very good freehand, you can do these things freehand, but I typically use some of these curvatures to go and roughly get some of the lines going, you know, and you can bend them and modify them and you profile yourself out a blade shape you want to do. You'll see on this example I did for another razor which is no longer in the collection anymore. I was considering various options of toes and if I'm going to use 1 or 2 pins and so forth. Spend time here. Make sure you mark the holes precisely. Make sure that you leave yourself enough space for a wedge and clearance. So once you've done these things and the blade looks like it's sitting, and you know, it's representing what you've got there, not that this is a match, then once you're there, then you can move to the next process. I said I want to use this razor as an example. I actually found the original template I did for this. Here we go. So I'm just going to show you guys. That's it. There we go. So once you've got it marked and you've got your profile, then you can do a couple of things. I typically cut it out, and then you can go and stick that onto your material. Can you guys see here? Sorry, this camera is up high. So imagine this is the template. You would make 2 of them, and then you would go and roughly cut out those pieces of material for your scale. And you would go and mark where you need to drill. If you're going to put in a stop pin, as an example with this one, also consider that. So you're going to end up with 2 pieces like this. These have seen a bit of work. They're actually old failed projects, if I can put it that way. Not failed, I just wasn't happy. So try and get your material in the size or the thickness you want for the scales. You'll see there's a significant difference. And that is because the wood stock I got from a friend. He had wood. It didn't cost me anything, but these are, I think, 5 mil thick. So you're going to end up with beefy things like this, and you need to sand them down. You can do that by hand. You can use a belt sander, whatever you have got to your available to you. I use sandpaper. Especially when I started. So I had various grades of sandpaper starting at 60, I think, all the way up to 2000. So what I would do is I would put 2 spots of glue onto a backing, a wood backing, stick it on there, sandpaper on a flat surface, and I would sand it, check it, keep on sanding until I got it to the thickness I want for the scale. What I would do then is take these 2 thin pieces, stick them together. You can just wrap them with tape, hold them by hand, whatever you want to do, and I would go and drill my 2 holes so that it is square and straight through the holes. I would put that to the side, and then I would start working on a wedge. I like a wedge, but they are difficult to make because they're small and quite thin. So if you're not used to it, you can also use just a square spacer. But when you do that, make sure you have got some washers at the back so that the frame stays fundamentally square, and as you open and close it, you don't have got a lot of torque and tension on the scales. So this one's what we call a spacer, and that is what a wedge looks like. So back to what you can use from broken scales. I found this, it's lead wedge that came from this razor, if I can recall correctly. And this is a, yes it was, looks like it. So this is a very good reference point for wedge. If you haven't got a good reference point, it's roughly about 7 degrees on both sides, so 14 degrees inclusive for wedge. You'll see here this piece of horn that came actually off here, ended up in there for that wedge. When you make these wedges at the beginning, make them larger and keep them square. Don't worry about the profile. Don't worry about these, whatever you're going to do. Don't worry about them yet. So, you've got your wedge at 7 degrees. You're going to take your 2 pieces of scale. You're going to put in your wedge. And you are, what I do is I glue them in, okay? So I put in glue, and then you line it up, all glued up like that. Remember back here, you would have your 2 holes which you've already drilled. So I'm going to put this example down because it's not going to work for this purposes. These are plastic scales I took off a Ralph Oust. You'll see they've got a spacer, but fundamentally, if you've got a wedge, it's going to look like this. So what I would then go and do is, I would go and take the pivot pin, and I would insert the pivot pin while I'm gluing this in. Okay, so this will have a clamp at the back with glues, and I will leave this so that the scales are straight, they're lined up, nothing's misaligned. Okay, and I leave that until it's dry. Once it's dry, I will then go and re-drill this hole. I've already got a pilot hole this side through the wedge because the wedge didn't have a hole. And the wedge is going to be square and it's going to be sticking out this side. But fundamentally, the wedge is then glued in. Then you go and do your final profiling on the shape of the point you want on there. Okay, so as an example, this one's more teersy. This was a bit of a other design. So you will see on the wedge it's thinner there at the bottom than the top because my square fundamentally was going down that way. And as you grind it this side, it would be thicker. So it's not rocket science and it all works well. Just make sure your wedge is larger and then you grind your pointing. Once you've done that and you're happy with that, then you can go and pin the razor. I have got a video where we do pinning. I'll link it in the description. It's actually a short video. 3/4 of the video is me trying to get the old pin out on the back. Go and have a look at it. It's actually entertaining and you'll learn something there. When we get to pinning, you also don't need many expensive tools and a large, heavy, expensive anvil. This is an old mason's chisel, stone mason's chisel. Okay. I drilled in a 1/16 or a 1.6 millimeter hole in there, 0.9 of a millimeter deep. I use 1/16 brass rods. This is actually from welding or soldering, brass, and then the caps. In that same video, I give you a view of the caps and stuff I use and have made. So it's all in the other video, I link it. Ball end hammer, don't get a heavy one, get something that's light. Polish up the ball end so it's nice and smooth and round. I keep my finger on the back side, and that's how I've got control when I do my pinning. So pinning, you don't need expensive tools. See what you've got and make use of that. So then, once this is then all dried up, then you would start fitting the razor. So if you had internal washers, you would insert the internal washers. You would insert your caps. In this case, I'm not putting any of that on. I just want to show you guys the example. So there's the pin in there, and then if you've done everything correctly, then this will slide in nicely and it will rest in the scales like you envisioned when you made them. Okay. If you've got lots of tolerances or you made a slight little mistake with drilling the pivot hole, maybe too close, sometimes that bit can fractionally hit on the wedge, and that's not a problem either, guys, as long as it's not a lot. Because what I do is, you get some razors that are really very tight, you open this up and you put in a very thin file or sandpaper and you just work the wedge where it's hitting slightly back, and then the problem solved. You pin your razor and you're done. I hope I've covered the important stuff. If you've got a belt sander or a fancy grinder, light pressure. Pressure is not your friend here. It's a little bit too much pressure and your scales are going to be slightly thinner or thicker or slightly uneven or not straight. Take your time. I also always finished on sandpaper on a known flat surface like a granite top to make sure I've got my surfaces spot on. The other thing which you want to do, if you've got something like wood, you want to treat it with beeswax or put on a lacquer like I've got here on these. Decide what you want to do, finish it off, polishing them off, and then the final bit for me is the pinning. Thank you, guys. If there's any questions, it was quite a quick video. If you've got any questions, leave them in the comments below and I can see how I can answer them.